Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for June 11th. And would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would you please call the roll?
I will. Good evening, Commissioners. Just clarification, I believe it's June 12th.
Oh,
Just make sure, set the
always
record
a day behind. Thank you.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Bundy.
Here.
Commissioner Chase.
Here.
Commissioner Friedman.
Here.
And Commissioner Lee.
Here.
All right, so at this point in the meeting, we always ask for those who have a comment on something that is not on the agenda to step up to the microphone and speak their 3 minutes if you have something to say that's not on the agenda. Seeing no sudden movement, we will close that opportunity and go right to our public hearing tonight, which is for 309 Corte Madera Avenue, listed as design review number PL 2018-0035 DRC for modifications to the existing home, including an additional 144 square feet to the basement level, 815 square feet of additional living area to the second or main level, and 668 square feet to be added to the upper third level. So before we turn it over to Mr. Boyle, I will just check with the commissioners to see who's been by the site. Phyllis? Yes. Bob? You've been there, I know.
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
And Charles? Yes. So we've all been, myself included, by the site, taken a look at it. So this is a public hearing. We have just read some materials placed on the dais that have come in since the staff report was issued. So at this point, it is Mr. Boyle's presentation to make.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners and members of the audience. Just want to point out again that the items that did come to the town post distribution of the packet, which was Friday, June 8th, are at the back table in hard copy, and then also a correspondence that came just about an hour ago is in the back table as well. And so hard copies are there, and then all commissioners have them. So yes, the project before you is the expansion of 309 Corte Madera Avenue. This is an existing home, and the expansion, as is written in the, well, I'll just start with the location. Location is about halfway up Corte Madera Avenue on the inside curve. It's an older home located just almost touching the property line, which is adjacent to Corte Madera Avenue. This is in the R1 zoning district, and it's also in the Christmas Tree Hill overlay. So there are special requirements for that. In terms of the project summary, the expansion will result in a proposed floor area ratio of 22%. Currently, the project is about 16% floor area ratio. Maximum allowed is 40%. Lot coverage existing is 16, proposed is 22, and maximum is 40. So it's under both of those requirements. In terms of setbacks, mentioning Christmas Tree Hill, because this is in Christmas Tree Hill, all property lines that are adjacent to streets have flexible setbacks. I think probably all the projects you've had, the front setback has been flexible because the property line adjacent to a street in most cases is the front property line. In this case, we have property lines adjacent to two streets, Corte Madera Avenue and California Lane. California Lane is a private lane. However, we have determined that there's flexibility on both setbacks, the setbacks adjacent to California Lane and the setbacks adjacent to Corte Madera Avenue. California Lane, as you'll see, is kind of irrelevant in this case in terms of the development, but those are the guidelines. In terms of side setbacks, standard with all other R1 properties, the side setbacks are 6 feet. And in this case, the north side, which is adjacent to, relatively close to the neighbor to the right, which is 305, Corte Madera Avenue. The existing setback I think I put in the existing setback. Existing setback is quite close. I believe it's about 2.5 feet, and that's proposed not to change. So that's an existing non-conforming setback on that side. On the other side, the south side, where the addition is taking place, the required setback again is 6 feet. The proposed addition will be approximately 26 feet away from this property line, and the patio under discussion and proposed will be 6 feet away from that property line. And this will be more evident in the site plan. So the site plan here showing, their pointer. So starting off down to the lower right, we have Corte Madera Avenue. We have some old concrete stairs that come up. We have property line is right in here, and I'll zoom in the next one. Right in here is the property line, so all this area here is property of the town right of way and for Corte Madera Avenue. The white box here is the existing home, and the gray box here is the proposed addition of the structure, and the checkered box here is the proposed addition to the patio. So let me just go to the next one. Probably go back and forth. So zooming in a little closer, again, existing home very, very close to the property line. Property line is actually right in here. Proposed home will be, the proposed addition, I should say, will be 5 feet 9 inches from that property line. So they're not putting it right on, they're putting it about 5 feet 9 inches away. So additional 3-story structure is here. Patio area is here, and majority of the remaining, the footprint of the existing home stays where it is. Some elements are removed and major, redesign inside the home, but the footprint of the original residence stays where it is. As I mentioned, home was, in the staff report, home was built quite a while ago, back, records show 1912. Again, backing up a little bit, vehicle access is off of California Lane, no vehicle access off Corte Madera Avenue. In terms of parking, required parking is 3 parking spaces, and it meets that requirement with 2 in the garage here and 1 in this garage here. Jumping to elevations, this is the existing north elevation on the left, and upper left and lower right is the proposed north elevation. The section of the house that more or less remains is here in the new addition. Basically, this element here is taken off, and this, I believe, the original gable underneath is revealed and remains. And then the additional structure is here. At this elevation, you're seeing 2 stories, and there is, as you'll see in other elevations, there's a basement below. So architectural style, matching the ridges and the pitches of the existing home, matching or being congruent or similar in terms of window style. Exterior siding will match. Just point out the exterior siding here. This shingle material will be removed. That's really the only material that's being removed. There's shingles here, as long as this whole element. And shingles on some of the gables, that's being removed and replaced with horizontal siding, which is stipulated in the staff report. So that's the north elevation, which is kind of looking up into the backyard. The existing south elevation is the elevation you'd see if you were standing on Corte Madera Avenue. In this case, the existing building is the section to the right here, and the proposed and added is this section here. And here you get a view of the 3 different levels: basement level here, second main level, and 3rd level here. Existing proposed east elevation, and this is the elevation that is facing the neighbor. Obviously the neighbor to the east is the one that's very, very close to the property line, not a significant amount of changes to this elevation here. This is the old house. Some changes again to the siding material, some changes to windows. You can see the addition popping up, beyond here, and so that's the changes to the east. Switching over the changes to the west is this elevation here, bringing out the new structure. Again, most of this, the existing structure, cannot be seen because it's covered by the new addition here. Again, horizontal siding, windows to match, and matching gable roofs at various points. Just some elevations, some photos of the site. Existing south elevation looking from Corte Madera Avenue, showing the story poles slightly there to the left. Story poles again looking from Corte Madera Avenue. And view, and these were all in your staff report, view looking down Corte Madera Avenue with the heavy canopy of trees on the left. The story poles are back in there somewhere. This is a top so California Lane dead ends and then becomes a public path. At the top of that public path, where it connects to Redwood Avenue, is this view. And you can see the story poles down below. The property owner's barn is here to this white structure here. There was there's quite a bit of discussion in the emails back and forth regarding height of the patio and how that's measured and what numbers were used. I just wanted to point out a couple of things in terms of the couple sheets. Sheet A1 indicates these various elevations, 95.25 for the top of the patio, and then down the grade down below, which isn't really an exact science of where that grade is going to be when they're all done, but we're looking in the range of anywhere as low as of 86.9 down here, and as high as 88 up here. So with an 87 here. So those are the varying elevation markers in the plan set. Same thing on GD1. And I addressed that in some of the email comments. I just want to point out in terms of public outreach, there was, the applicant sent out letters to the neighbors in the immediate area, provided a graphic there of which property owners were notified, which property owners responded. This project, because it's in the Christmas Tree Hill area, was sent to the Christmas Tree Hill Building Design Committee. They submitted their comments, which are in your packet, generally favorable of the design. There was, I'll back up a little bit, there was concern from neighbors. Majority of the concern from the neighbors was the need for a construction management plan and careful evaluation of how construction is going to happen on California Lane, because this is a lane that's a dead end and critical access to all those folks. So that construction management plan, as with all projects, will be required and reviewed at the time when the project is submitted for a building permit. That will be reviewed by Public Works, Building Department, and Planning Department. So those were the majority of the comments from, I believe, 6 of the neighbors. And then the neighbors who are present tonight at 427 Redwood Avenue submitted a couple of emails, and they have received responses from both staff and I think some responses from the applicant himself. And so those are available in your packet. I summarized their concerns in the staff report, and that is located on page 5. I won't go over them in detail, but just categories of erosion and stability of the land, access and impact to California Lane, patio height and railing on top of that patio, construction and structure impacts to their vineyard, and then exterior construction on weekends. Taking those, just in terms of California Lane, as I mentioned, it's a private lane. So I did spoken to both the applicant and the neighbors, the repair or modifying or damage that is, if any of that takes place during this project, will need to be something worked out between the property owners. The town will not, be involved in that. We're certainly here to assist if need be. That pretty much concludes my report. Staff is able, as attached to resolution, outlining all the findings. Staff is able to make all the design review findings for the project, and those are shown here in these two slides. And based on that, staff recommends approval of the project and approval of the attached resolution. That concludes my report, and I'll have any questions.
Thank you, Phil. Our commissioners may have some questions. Phyllis, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Dr. Bundy?
Yeah, Phil, on the patio itself, is that going to be pervious structure? I know the stones won't be, but what they're set in, is that going to be concrete, or is that going to be some kind of pervious material?
I'll have the applicant address it directly, but my understanding is not pervious. It is a solid stone patio, unless they're putting some type of special grout in between the stones. It's probably, the water will not seep through it. It'll run off.
Okay.
That's all for you? All right. Charles, any questions?
Not for Phil.
Okay. Jennifer?
No, not at this
Okay.
time. I think though, Bob, it says
I
that
guess-
it's set in sand with subsurface drainage, is what I read here, the permeable stone pavers.
It's on the first page.
It's on the site plan, but I'm sure,
Permeable stone paver
Yeah,
set in
it's-
sand with subsurface drainage, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good question of the applicant.
Yeah.
What is that patio structure made out of?
I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Phil, I have a couple of questions for you. On the plan that you've highlighted the elevations,
Uh-huh.
and you've got some circles around 88 and so forth.
Okay.
It says here on the plan that the top of wall is 95.5, which is 3 inches above the patio surface. And then up there to the right, it says bottom of wall at 90. So when I read this, I assume that the grading is going to be at 90. Because the wall will extend as a footing down below the grade, right? So bottom of wall would be finished grade there, and it looks almost like there's a, I forget what's outside that, that's a window right there, I think. That's what I assume it would be. Thusly, it would be a 5.5-foot wall at that point, plus a railing. Is that fair to assume? We can ask the applicant.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to ask the applicant, because, yeah, in some way, it is a wall, but, this is kind of a, it's a wall with only one side, right? It's not you can't jump over this wall and get to the other side of the wall. So it's really a box. I look at it as a box, with a lid on top of it that's patio.
Okay. For the record, would you summarize the discussion about Corte Madera Avenue improvements in the stone wall that's outside the property line?
Yes, I will. Thank you for that. So we did receive the email from David McPherson regarding, probably a visual of that is that, regarding his interest and inquiry about a future project, the widening or the improvement of Corte Madera Avenue, and particularly the pedestrian path on what I'll call the west side of Corte Madera Avenue. That improvement is in the capital improvement plan for the town of Corte Madera, created by the Department of Public Works, that just went to the planning just went to the town council earlier this month. as I stated, there isn't a specific schedule for that project. There isn't a specific funding source for that project. In talking to the Director of Public Works, that is something that the town would like to do someday, but it's not clear, when that will take place. Numerous, dozens and dozens of projects on that capital improvement program, and, Public Works will work with the town council determining priority of those projects.
But the intention is that stone wall will be replaced or improved, and then the public access, the path will be improved as well at some point. That is
I
the
would
scope of
just be
that
comfortable
project.
saying the intention, based on the Public Works document, is to create a consistent 4-foot pathway on that side of Corte Madera Avenue, from California Lane to, I want to say 499 499 Corte Madera Avenue. So that's basically the detail of the description, create a 4-foot path on that side of the road. If that means taking out the wall, it means taking out the wall. That may, so I don't think we know that level of detail at this point.
Okay.
Okay. Bob, you got something else?
Yes, the issue of the trees that are overhanging the street from the standpoint of safety as well as fire protection, defensible space, that's the town property. Is there
Yes.
any plans to address those trees from the standpoint of safety and fire protection?
So I did talk to the fire marshal about this project, and those are acacia trees. Meaning the big ones here are acacias, which, and I believe these are privets, the greener ones here. Acacias are very fire prone. They're they're on our nuisance tree list, so not a tree we're in favor of. According to the applicant, these have been trimmed by either PG&E or perhaps another entity at different times over the years. So there is no plan to remove these by either the town or the applicant. Because this project is a significant remodel and it's in the wildland urban interface, which is a high fire zone, there's a requirement that they submit a vegetation management plan, and probably in that plan it'll address the need for vegetation to be a certain distance from existing building and the proposed building. So that could result in a trimming of these trees. But no specific plan to remove these at this point.
Okay.
All right. Another question, and the applicant might answer it, but did Public Works make any determination that the new downspout water would have to get to the street or sidewalk, or it's adequate to dissipate it on the site and not get it away from the building and create any kind of drainage out of the new patio area? Or is that something that will be reviewed in the building permit?
Answer is yes, it will be reviewed and shown in more detail in the building permit, but you are correct, they do show a dissipator there. Public Works didn't have any additional comments regarding that, and again, they will pick that up in more detail with at the building permit submittal
All right.
time.
So being that it's a construction management plan required for a project that the town permits, but that lane is private, we can't really say how they deal with it there, or can we? Is it just a matter of being the policeman between neighbors, or how does the town look at controlling traffic on a private lane and access on a private lane?
Well, a little bit outside my scope. I think certainly emergency personnel will require that lane to remain free and clear, at all times if an emergency has to happen. Just like we would require that of if it was a public street, or at least if they're going to close it, notify emergency personnel so they know ahead of time that that's closed, and if an emergency happens. I don't know the nuances of the level of enforcement that we would have
Okay.
on California Lane versus Corte Madera Avenue.
All right then. Thank you. Anyone else? No? All right. So now, the applicant, Dan, will you be making the presentation, or?
Yeah, I'm gonna
So-
start and then hand it over to Eric.
Okay.
So we're gonna go through the dates. So, Rob, who's one of our neighbors, has a young child now, so he's headed out.
Okay.
I don't wanna speak for him, but yeah, if appropriate, but up to you.
If you would start in, please, yeah, I understand.
You have to do it time to
All right.
Thank you. I'm gonna be, sorry.
You're live. It's, I believe, your
Testing. All right. So I'm just going to say a few brief words and then hand over to Eric Layton, who's our architect with Patriarch Architecture. So my family's seated here, my wife Ann, my daughter Alyssa, and Lily. And we purchased the house in November of 16. And what we were told by the previous owners, the Robbins family, Vicki Robbins, was that they're, since we thought it was 1906, Phil put 1912, so we'll just go with that. That there's been only 3 families that have lived in this house since then, so we're proud to take over the history there, and hopefully we'll be there for some time. But it's a really fun property. It's unique in a lot of ways. Phil, if you don't mind putting up the site plan? Sure. Could be helpful, I think. There's 3 structures on the property. We've got the house itself, which is 1912, the barn, which is also 1912, and then I believe in 1995, the the one-car garage was demolished and rebuilt with a 2-car garage. And as part of that, which is not really relevant, there was a significant addition planned and approved, actually, by the Planning Commission for the house, which is very similar to what we have now. And part of the reason we're here before you is we suffered a small fire in the house and had to move out. But it was the sprinklers that were a requirement of the 1995 renovation and the garage that actually saved the house from being completely demolished. So they went off and saved the house. So sprinklers all the way. So there's a little bit of history which we won't talk about too much today, but there is some discussion about the wall down on Corte Madera Ave, and you've got a really beautiful stone stairway here that's really in the city right of way. I don't know all of the history, but I did some title research when we were buying the property. But the city right-of-way for Corte Madera Avenue, I believe, was outside of the stairway at one point. And it was more of a zigzag pattern. And then when they realigned the street, they made it more curvilinear. And this got closer, the property line got closer to the house, which is why the house is so close to the property line. And there used to be a stairway that came up to the living level that's been removed, which would be actually outside the property line now, but at one point was inside the property line. So if they go forward with any of the street right-of-ways, there's a little bit of history on what the previous property line was, which dates back, I think, to the 20s. There is an easement, Phil, which I don't know if that's relevant, which you didn't mention. So just along the property line here, whoops. There's that every once in a while.
You can grab the mic, Dan,
So-
when you walk over.
So I'll just mention it, I don't think it's too relevant, but just so you know, this line that runs right there, right through the property, that's the property line. And this area here to this area here is actually owned by this property. And it's a perpetual exclusive easement with this structure to the benefit of this property, because this property used to own that property, and when they transferred, they kept the property line, but they signed an easement giving the rights to this property for this land. So if you look at it physically, it follows this pattern, but the property line comes down this way. So it doesn't really matter too much to what we're doing, but it's a little bit part of the property and part of the landscape plan, if you look at it. So again, we had our fire in November of last year. It was a small fire, but it was enough to push us out of the house, the soot and the smoke. So we've been out for about 6 months now. And we had visions on a renovation and an addition, and this a little bit forced our hand. So we went forward with it and designed it. So Eric will talk about this, but we try to respect what we think is the history. It's not historical per se, but it really is one of the older houses in the town. It's a wonderful property, really unique in a lot of ways, but it's kind of subtle and historic and white and kind of quiet in a lot of ways. So we picked up that architecture. We kept the footprint of the house and added on to it. And then we tried to make it as innocuous as possible for something of this scale. So we kept it away from the property line to the west. There's no formal setbacks away from Corte Madera Ave. The existing structure is effectively on the property line, so we pushed it away and scissored it back, and that's effectively what was approved back in 1995 for the addition, so we kind of follow that. And then I think, other than what exists already, we conform to the city, or excuse me, the town guidelines. So I don't think we're breaching in any way any town code. So we've tried to do that without, asking for any variances or so forth. And then I think the Christmas Tree Hill Dwellers Association kind of summed it up with complimenting us on the cottage style simplicity of the architecture, kind of picking up the old style. We're using exactly the same materials, the exact same kind of window styles, same colors, and really just adding on and trying to make it really feel. So you got old marrying with new, but we're not modifying the new to the point where you kind of break its back. So this is a very old house. There's no heat on the second floor. You've got single pane windows. It's not insulated. So we're going to try to fix what we can, but also respect it to the point where we don't change it and sort of try to, as best we can, live in the past, which we really like. It's part of the reason why we were attracted to the property. So with that, as a plug for Eric, Eric is an owner, a developer, and an architect. And in my personal opinion, he's got a unique set of skills in evaluating properties like this. Very active in Corte Madera, Larkspur, Marin, Mill Valley, and just has a really unique way of looking at these properties and pulling out what we perceive to be the sort of the forward value on them in a very complementary way. So I'll hand it over to Eric, and he can, take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right, we may ask you some questions, but Eric, go ahead. No, please, go in.
Close to that thing. Eric Layton, architect, and thank you, Dan, for the nice plug. And thank you all for taking the time to evaluate this project. And Phil has done a great job. Plug for Phil. He's been very detail-oriented and accommodating to a lot of information coming his way, and has done a great job. So really thank you, Phil. So what I want to do is just kind of layer on, Phil has done a great job of, giving you the design aesthetic here. Dan obviously has layered on his information about how we arrived at this design and a little bit of history. And so what I would like to do is just sort of layer on with that information so that you just have more of what's going on and where we came from. So I would like to say the existing structure there is really lovely. I mean, it has a lot of classic elements to it. Phil, do you mind just bringing up one of the elevations? This is the worst one. So this is the, I call it the abomination. This add-on that must have been done in the 50s or something, where looks like a tree fort that somebody put on to a really nice original structure. And so this is a great opportunity on this remodel to get that out of there and pretty it up and bring it back to the original gable end. And it also lessens the exacerbation of any conflict with that near side yard property line. So we're kind of moving away from that with this. The other challenge is that the upper floor on this design is essentially in the roof. So it vaults from the upper plate of the lower floor. And so the little rooms upstairs, which the girls love, and they've tucked away in there, but they're fairly low ceilings. And my challenge was to get this additional design to have the same pitches and roof feel, but not be too much taller and still have walls. And I think we did a pretty good job of that, but I would have loved to make it all one height. It just wasn't really possible. But I think we did a pretty good job of stepping the building back, as you can see here, so that the upper floor steps away, and it adds some articulation to the wall masses. It also makes the upper floor seem smaller, and it's hard to display that with the story poles, but it definitely will be stepping back on the upper floors, which helps a lot in the massing. The The fenestration, the siding, the roofing, all of which are essentially mimicking and replaying what is there. Now, there are some trim details that we're going to carry throughout and add consistency. There was some inconsistency with the existing trim, so we're going to add that back in so that there's basically trim, siding, eaves, roofing. All those details will be consistent throughout, rather than a little bit here, a little bit there. The other thing I'd like to do is just sort of answer questions. You've touched on a couple of topics. Number one, just sort of the nuts and bolts, the construction management plan. We've already started that and have been thinking about it. Obviously, guest parking, it's going to be off-site, and you have to carpool on a site where you've got a busy road, where it's not really good parking down below, and the lane is a little bit choked. So it's going to take a lot of good neighborhood outreach and good communication to make sure that these run smoothly. Dan is, in my opinion, a very good neighbor and will do a good job of communicating well. One of the pressure relief valves we have on this site is that it's got a lot of open space up above. So there's an existing gate, which, if you can see it here, exists here. It's 12 to 14 inches or feet wide, so that can be opened, and this is very likely to be the turnaround spot. So getting up and around, as well as allows for storage to be stored here. These fence panels also can be removed, and will be, actually, to allow for storage to occur here. There's plenty of places for temporary toilet facilities, and relatively reasonable parking for, let's say, a subcontractor that's a plumber or an electrician. All the labor really needs to park below and either walk up or drop off and then, park down below. But the subs with their equipment on their trucks actually do have to come, and of course you have to have material deliveries. So it's going to take good organization and good communication, but it does have the opportunities to accommodate these things much better than a lot of other properties do, because it's got the land. So that's the good news there. Some of the other questions you had on the pervious patio, that is designed as pervious, and the reason being is that you have an opportunity, if you have a solid surface, then you have to slope it all into the drain, and it accelerates the water, as you know, and then you got to put in a dissipator and speed it up to slow it down. So why not just slow it down from the get-go? It also allows you to have a flat patio from the get-go. So if you set it in sand, you can put sub-drains below, but I'd rather not do that. What I want to do is actually capture it on the back side of the retaining wall so that the water can percolate in and recharge land water. But if it has to get to the wall, it'll be gathered up and then dissipated on the back side of the wall, which you'll see there. And I did speak to Public Works a couple of times and just made sure that he was comfortable with that design. And so we've already had several conversations on it, because it is a concern of mine as well. That dissipator is going to dissipate the downspouts that are on the addition. The existing structure, I've observed a bit throughout as we got in contract. I observed the March miracle that we had as far as rain. Saw a lot of the rain coming, the water coming off the existing roof, and they do go to splash blocks, and they do migrate down and dissipate fairly well. And Public Works agreed that that was reasonable to leave those splash blocks as they were. So we discussed that as well. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the patio in the southern corner. We got some late noticed concern from neighbors, and so Dan and I have had a couple of discussions about it. The landscape architect, and in general, your question, Peter, about the height of that wall, the elevations. These were by survey, and I've confirmed them, and they appear to be very close. The lowest one, the 86.91, that's actually off the property. You can see the property line there. But what we can effectively regrade is on the property, of course. And you'll see the solid lines as they kind of sweep around. So the idea there is that we obviously build the footing for the retaining wall, and then we backfill on the back side of it so we can slope up 2 to 1 on that space between the property line and the concrete retaining wall for the patio, and actually cover up another couple of feet of the retaining wall by doing so. Same thing, this little window here. And the area below that is also where it has to be horizontal because the dissipator would be there. And that is gonna be an area where we'll have the elevation will be brought up again up against the lower part of the wall. Phil, do you have the landscape architect plan on this screen, or?
I do.
Okay, if you brought that up, the idea is that I had presumed we were going to plant some Myrica californica, which is a native evergreen shrub which grows pretty aggressively in this area, pretty happily, and it would fill this gap very well and essentially cover the entire wall within a year, maybe two. But you can get those in 5 and 10 gallon, and they're very happy in this area. And they would basically be in that zone between the retaining wall and the existing property line and the fencing. So that's on the landscape plan as well. The other thing that I think the landscape architect had intended on putting in that area was perhaps some larger trees that were deciduous. He had put in there red maple in that region, which would get up, and it would be again to the south of, to the north and to the west. There is concern from the neighbor about shading of his vineyard, so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, these would be deciduous, just like his vineyards, so I think it would be okay. But that certainly would be a discussion that we'd like to have with him about what that material would be. What that plant material would be. Now, I think that point that out. So that's this area here. So the Myrica would probably be in this area here, which is, again, screening between the fence and the proposed patio. And then this is where he's got some larger specimens. Now, again, this is south, so the sun is going to come up and do its thing. The vineyard is here. This line is kind of through here, and so this is the lower corner. The vineyard gets kind of narrow here, but that's definitely an issue, and it's fairly far over. I don't know if that would be an issue or not. We could do a little study on it. But right now, there's a large amount of evergreen acacia here, which I think this would be a substantial improvement if we were to, slowly phase out the acacia and phase in a deciduous 20-foot maple, would be my guess. So back to that question about the right-of-way and the fire vegetation management plan. Absolutely, it's in the WUI. We have to cut things back a bit. And right now, there's a black acacia, which is slated to be removed here. Again, to Phil's point, it's on the naughty list with the firemen. So that's going to go. And then these ones here are within a region of being close to the house. So I think most of the acacias are sort of here. But my guess is that we may have to trim those a little bit. But again, it's on city right away, so I don't know how we can do that. But I guess we talked to fire and we talked to Public Works and asked to trim them a bit. Otherwise, there was a maple here, which is going to go. And most of the things that are going back in are ornamentals, and it's going to be an improvement, obviously, from a fire perspective. So I think I covered the drainage, the other questions you had about landscaping, the elevations, and I will say that the patio in that corner is sort of way down near the road, and it's a way in which we can screen and buffer a little bit from the traffic noise, which nobody's really mentioned. It's a very busy street here, and there's plenty of outdoor space here. However, this is a nice spot because it's got a bit of view out and around the building. And so this is a preferred spot to have it. And by having some sort of structure here a little bit, it kind of forces the noise kind of to go up for the rest of the spaces. So that was the intent with that, but still really not making it too tall or too problematic. And there's really no other structures down there to really negatively impact. And we just don't want it to be negative to the street. But I think all the mitigating factors we put in as far as landscaping, lowering the wall, and stepping it back to the setback on the side and away from the front seem to be adequate. But again, we're flexible on certain discussions on that point. So with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Eric, very much. Charles, do you have any questions for Eric Layton?
I do. They're mostly about material choices and paint and that kind of thing. One, when I went to the site today, I observed that the newer edition in 1985 is kind of a brown. And then everything else is going this really nice white color. And in general, you're kind of creating this whole, kind of unified, really going back and reevaluating the property and taking it to this next level of cottage, right? So I was wondering if you had thought about painting the garage and the shed to match the other buildings so that it's even, not replacing that shingle, but just trying to bring it more, same with the garage doors, so that it looks like one property. Because I couldn't, just driving by, I knew what it was from the layout, but just because they didn't seem unified, so it reads as two different properties almost, like, so I didn't know if you'd thought about that. I didn't see it like marked out because you're not elevating any of those existing properties. So that was one question. The other one is I saw you had dashed in where you had future, perhaps PV, and for a house that the larger size 4,000, it seemed a little small. And I just had a question. The Tesla tile roofs are now available, and I don't know if you'd considered that, but because it's Christmas Tree Hill, there's this kind of cottage aesthetic to put some, full PV panels versus an integrated roof. Would you be, doing better for? And so I didn't know if you had actually thought or looked into that and looked at the price point. But then also I was wondering if you could get more coverage, because you could integrate those panels in the overall roof, and since you're replacing the whole roof, right? Like, there's an opportunity, so I wanted you to, if you'd looked at that. Also, the exposed concrete wall that faces the neighbor at the vineyard, is that just like board-formed concrete wall and it's just going to be exposed with no finish, just whatever comes out? I mean, I appreciate you saying that, the planting would eventually cover it, but, because it is a 5 or 6 foot tall retaining wall, if there had been consideration given to that. And then finally, I do appreciate that you're trying to kind of upgrade the vegetation in the area to a more kind of aesthetic appeal, and then also fire. And I guess I do wonder with Phil if he's ever seen a project where, like a public-private kind of collaboration where you can basically phase out the others, and then the private enterprise can basically, in that easement that really affects them, basically improve the property for the city and themselves. So those were my questions, so.
All right.
If you can remember all that.
No, I got it.
I'll go back and revisit.
No, I
it.
got it right here.
Proceed with trying to address that.
You bet.
yeah.
No, thank you so much for the questions, Charles. Number one, the paint in the garage, it did cross my mind. I had the exact same feeling. I was like, well, this, was missing because the barn has such a unique, very clear gambrel roof, and the house, so there is no plan to do so, and I'm a little bit about painting shingles. I mean, you can see it; it looks okay. So I guess the question is, it's a very good question, and I think the McCaddens want to bring consistency to the overall property, of course. How they do that is still debated. So we discussed it. We didn't come up with a good solution, but I think that it will be an ongoing discussion to bring
If
cohesion.
Dan feels like talking about it tonight, I'm
Yeah.
open to.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not typically, it's not a building that's being worked on, but they can decide that we can't say they have to paint it, but we can.
Well, right. So it's not enforceable, but I mean, I definitely am curious, like, whether that all of them are just more kind of. I think it's a good sign that, like, I'm not, but.
I think Eric's a little more diplomatic than I. There are no plans to paint the cabana, which we call the outbuilding, or the garage, to white. So the brown's there, it's kind of grown on us. And while there's not consistency in white across the property, we actually kind of like it in the brown. It's got some really interesting architectural details that kind of shine out with the brown. And then actually painting an existing structure to a different color is a little tricky. So at this stage and in the foreseeable future would remain brown, both of those structures.
Okay.
You'll be the no man? I'll be the maybe
Yeah, you
man.
be the good guy.
Okay, all right. So solar. So I love solar. I like to see it have an opportunity on every building, and it doesn't always get to go on, so I like to prep for it, and I run conduit. It's so easy to do to make sure that at the panel you can run a conduit all the way up into the attic space, so it's very easy to put on. In this case, you've got some pretty good roof planes that can accommodate it. It's a little cut up on the existing. The gable end there could accommodate it. But to your point, this is another challenge. I think you can actually get some on the lower roof planes actually better. But they all face south, and they all face a non-exposed area where people wouldn't really see it, which is the other good thing. So it's a good roof for it. I like to plan for it, and I like to encourage my clients to plan for it, and then eventually they put it in. But I mean, solar is going to be on every roof, and you know,
So the other question I had is would the barn or one of the other kind of ancillary would
Yeah,
it
another
make
good roof
sense
for
to
it.
consider it over there instead of the actual main building? But
absolutely. And my attitude is make it easy for the future. It's such a big cost that a lot of times if you put it in a planning commission, you know, it's $30,000-$40,000 that somebody agrees to, and they're like, well, wait, I just ran out of money, and then you have a trouble at the end. But solar is going to be on almost any roof that's in the future. I mean, including the garage. It's a great spot for it. But I just suggest we prep for it. That's what I do. Landscaping. No, you asked about what was your question?
The
Oh,
exposed
concrete finish.
wall.
Yeah. Totally agree. Every piece of concrete either needs to be treated with an interesting form so that it's got some interest to it so that you don't mind looking at it in a more contemporary view, or you need to grind it and put a stucco finish on it. And we haven't really decided on that, but it will have a finish. It will not just be, I took the form boards off and walked away. Absolutely. So it'll either be plaster over, or it'll have some sort of interesting form. But my guess it'll be sort of plaster of some sort.
There's a paint color that you called out, though. Plants.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be painted. You basically have to grind it
So it'll
and
be
then
painted too.
yeah, and paint it. Yeah, the integrated stucco color, plaster, whatever. You can also put waterproofing that has a color integrated to it on the negative side, but they're all good solutions. And then native.
So then it was just your suggestion about basically trying to get rid of the old acacias or any kind of undesirable, but it's in the city property. So
Yeah.
it was really kind of,
I
I
can't answer
appreciate
that.
that candid discussion. The question is can that really happen? So I was kind of looking back to Phil about, and it's if he's ever seen that in any other properties where you can not just trim them back, but, kind of slowly replace them or as a
Yeah.
private enterprise, if that's something they would want.
Right, and to be honest, I don't know the exact answer. It's a little bit, on a typical house down in the flats, let's say, one is responsible for one's sidewalk and one's trees between the sidewalk and the curb. So in this case, is this property owner responsible for the trees between, they don't, they've got a whole bunch of landscaping, and then they've got the stone wall, and they've got this tiny little sidewalk, then they've got the curb, then they've got Corte Madera Avenue. So I think this is one that Public Works would have to take a look at closely, and fire, and again determine what would be what would be reasonable in terms of removing the acacia, and what would they want to replace it replaced with, and of course what would the applicant be willing to do. And I think it would just be on a negotiation type of thing. But
In other words, nothing's going to happen.
If I may,
Sorry, Phil.
on most streets, at least on my street, we have property that is city property between our property line and the street. But everybody on our street plants that property. And now, if you do that, you need an encroachment permit with the city. So it was planted before the city enforced the encroachment permits. That said, that sort of implies that you, as the property owner, do what you will with that, but you have to get an encroachment permit if you're going to go plant a different tree or do something in that space. And if you want to trim the tree, I think you just have to notify the department and say, we want to trim that ugly, undesirable tree out there, and they'd say, have at it, and there would be no permit for that purpose, given that there's no tree permit and it's a bad designation tree. So,
Right.
it just becomes the homeowner's prerogative to go after it. Otherwise, it stays as is. Pretty much, yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
That's it. Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Jennifer?
All right. Can you kind of walk us along the western side, and explain what the fencing is? If it's, I know there's that existing sort of wooden wire fence, which I think you guys have a picture of. I don't completely understand how the retaining wall, how far it goes up, and then if there's, it looks like there's this gap, and then you have another concrete wall that relates to this wood deck on the north side. Can you just sort of like walk along that property line and what's where and how high it is?
Yeah, excellent question. So the idea is that the property just kind of slopes down and it gets to this lower corner here, just kind of, and what the design intends to do is sort of keep it sloping, but flatten it a little bit, and then flatten it a little bit, and then flatten it a little bit. So in order to do that, you have to have, if you can imagine a slope, and then if it goes like this, at the edge, you've got to support it, right? So what we've done is we've stepped it back, and then the intent is to have as little structure here as possible, but still flatten this out a little bit so that there can be grass, kind of flatter. But it still slopes at 1/4 inch or actually 1/2 inch per foot. So what we've done is you see these topographic lines here. They go from where they are here, and then they kind of push up on the hill. So what that means is that we're gonna slope up a little bit. So there's an existing welded wire fence along here, which it defines a property line, and the landscape design plan actually states that we've got a low wood retaining wall that holds up to 24 inches. Now, Dan and I have had some discussions, and I've looked at that, and I don't think we need that. I think we can get away with more like a slough board at the fence, so that we just kind of slope up. It sort of goes down a little bit and then goes back up. But there's very little water sort of running down there. It's not like a bunch of water's rushing over there and going down, because it's going to come this way, gather up, percolate in, and discharge down here. So it's not, drainage is not going that way. It's just that 6 feet. So it's not like it's gathering stuff and it's going to erode. So you can easily have the existing fence and just put an 8-inch slough board at the bottom, and then we can to just catch anything that might tumble down, over time. And then it just slopes up gently. And at this point, there's no, it just, the little slope, the 2-to-1, and then it's flat. Okay, so that's up at the top. At this point here, there's a 0 high wall at the setback line, and then it kind of grows out to the point where it's up to, if this is top of wall, it's not on this one, but that's not, 97. If that's 97 and that's 93, your maximum height is that difference. So it's about 4.5 feet there. Okay, then it steps down these stairs, down from 97.5 down to 95.5, or 0.25. So it comes down 2.25 feet. And then it's again low, so it's 95 to 92. So a 3-foot wall there. And then it grows up to about a 5-foot wall here.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And this is the concrete
around.
retaining wall.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And at the bottom, again, this really, I grew these right out of existing grade. So you don't really need a retaining wall there, as shown on the landscaping plan. Now, it's a kind of a nice to have, because it gives you a little bit, don't have to slope it as much, but it's really not necessary.
And then where does the glass and
So
the
right here would be,
fence?
so obviously you have to have a guardrail on any drop that's greater than 30 inches by building code. So you've got to have a guardrail there. This drop goes from 3 feet up to 5 feet, and so we need a 42-inch high guardrail. Now, if you've been to this spot, you'll know that there's a lot of traffic noise. And so Dan said, well, let's just pick it there maybe, but I've encouraged him to have the glass, because it'll really make an impact on reducing the sound as it migrates up through this whole property, this is a busy, busy street. So I think it's a really good thing to have there. Now, planting the Mirica here, basically that's a 12-foot shrub potentially. but very easily managed with trimming and whatnot. But it'll fill this gap very well, and so you really won't see that glass. It's just that the glass will be there to actually deflect the noise, the street noise.
Okay. And then
Does that
can-
answer your question?
It does, thank you. And then on the, as it attaches to the barn, that's also then just a small concrete 18-inch high wall that's also being used as an end to the deck, is that right?
Yeah, so here it dies to nothing.
Right.
So here we just have kind of slopes away. Then up here, again, it's sort of level to level, but as you go up that 2 feet, we've got some steps down, and so there's less than a 2-foot rise from the existing grade to this patio here, which, again, it's not enough to actually require the grade drop between the patio and this landscaping area is not enough to require an actual fence or guardrail, so there really isn't one there. It's just the existing fence comes to here, and there's an existing fence there.
Okay, and then the existing fence along the property line remains.
Yes, that's the welded wire fence, and that remains.
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't think that I have any other questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Dr. Bundy? All right, Ms. Metcalf?
I wanted to bring up the barn, Dan. No, I had an idea, reminded me of something I did in my former home. Yeah, the shingled barn, the brown,
Yes. The garage.
That's the garage.
the garage, but you were referring to the barn with the gambled roof before. The painter I used have the oil-based paint just by pouring turpentine into it. He then sprayed a small section and took a rag and wiped it off. And what happened was you had the whitish color, but all of the grain, all of the interesting patterns came through, and it was absolutely beautiful. And it's just something, if you think at some time you want to bring the color more to the off-white, it's something to do and not lose all the beauty of the shingle.
So it's like a weathered look, almost like a weathered white. Okay, very interesting.
It was Dan Ross painting. At least does a great job.
Right. Anything else, Phyllis? Okay. No. Yeah, the garages are not technically a part of the application, is that right, Phil?
Correct. The
yeah, okay.
application shows no changes to
Right.
any of the
Right.
accessory structures except for the deck off of the barn. And so
Right.
just to clarify, the barn, I believe, is the white structure on the top, which is here, and the garage is the brown structure.
Right. I want to thank you for providing the sketch of the property line that you did. And, just referencing top of wall to the grades, I can see that nowhere does it exceed the 6 foot in height. So it's like having a 6-foot fence, 6 foot in from the property line, and then you're having either the glass or a wire fence on top of that. And I looked at what you've got marked out and how it ramps up. So I understand it, and I think that with all that screening in there, it's going to go away shortly. And the other thing that I didn't think would cover as quickly as it has is the ficus has just covered walls in a year, unbelievably so. And, you can put the wash on there so it doesn't look bad for a year, and then in a year it's covered with ficus. It's amazing. I was originally quite concerned about that wall. Now that I've examined what it is and what the elevations are, most of the wall is less than 6 foot. It's only down at Corte Madera Avenue, and as you turn the corner, then it starts to become less as you head up, and then the wall elevation jumps up at the back of the patio, and you have about a 6 foot elevation there, and then it tapers again to nothing at the back of the barn, or what do you call it, the cabana? Dan?
Yeah, the cabana's still.
The cabana, right, so that's the, that will be the teenage hangout, right?
Shit.
The shed.
So, I don't know, after all of this, I think, if you have anything you want to say in addition before we go to public comment, please say what you might want to add to this at all.
Yeah, sometimes questions come up during the public comment, and I want to be available to answer any other questions and give you the opportunity I'll be here, put it that way.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So with that said, we now open it for the public to comment. You have 3 minutes if you step up to the microphone. And how many people would like to comment here tonight? Got 1, 2, 3 or so, something like that, 4 or 5? All right, so I have a timer, and I'll give you the 3 minutes, so please step up, and let's make it so that we don't wait for the next person to get up to the microphone. So, please start out, Mr. McPherson.
Since others are being shy, I'll be happy to take the first. David McPherson at 431 Corte Madera Avenue. So for 25 years, we've been passing this home, admiring it, particularly when we walk and we cycle by it when you're a little bit slower than in the motor vehicle. And so we couldn't be more pleased with the way the architect and applicant have designed the improvement, and we support it, and we hope that you approve it tonight. I had submitted an email regarding a concern that I had about the proposed sidewalk, which is slotted for the 2018-2019 fiscal year, but in reality, after talking to Public Works, it may not come as soon. So for the better part of, a decade, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee and neighbors on Corte Madera Avenue have been lobbying to improve the safety of the sidewalk. It's not because of the traffic and because there's so little room, particularly at certain pinch points. You don't let kids too often walk down Corte Madera Avenue, which is a shame. And of course, if you're less than fully able-bodied, then it has a lot of problems with its asphalt degradation, et cetera, et cetera. So we were very pleased to see that the Public Works had been able to slot it for improvement. Now, my concern for the McAdam family was, well, if they finished their project and 6 months later, Public Works came along and said, we're going to build this, and that's their first notice, and they've removed all their heavy equipment, which could have dealt with this retaining wall. I as a homeowner, I would have been blindsided. So that was my intent in bringing that to the Planning Commission's and the applicant's attention. Public Works is now incredibly nimble with Peter Brown, and he pointed out something that I didn't see with my eye, which is that the center line of Corte Madera Avenue doesn't have to be fixed. And so I don't know what the ultimate solution is going to be, but it doesn't absolutely mean that this retaining wall has to leave. And even if it does go, I have no idea what the future holds in terms of who's responsible for doing the work there, as well as all the way up to 499. So that's it in a nutshell. I wanted to just somewhat apologize because I think the tenor of the email was more like directing what had to be done. And I really intended it to be more informative so that no one was blindsided. So I support the project, and I hope you approve it.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Christy Smith from 301 Corte Madera, and I'm speaking for myself, which I support the project, and also for my neighbor Rob. Excuse me. He said, overall, we feel they take great care of their property and keep it well maintained. It will be good for the overall value of the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Hi, John Tilney, at 427 Redwood, so the neighbor along the side that we've been discussing a bit. I wanted to start by saying thanks to Dan. He's was a member of this commission for a number of years and obviously served the community and as a local developer, he's obviously given a lot of thought to this project. And a lot of it we really think is going to improve the aesthetics and the value of the property. I have this, I don't know if, Phil, if you could pass this handout around. I think a few things that miss is just sort of from our perspective, you know, looking down, you can see the story poles in this first one from our property, which is oriented directly at his property. And I think what's wonderful about this design is he's given a lot of thought to that. It's a massive increase in the overall square footage of the house, in the overall footprint of the house, in the height of the house, and obviously the impermeable surfaces as shown on the plan. So, you know, we think that that's great. Our biggest concern, which we've voiced in a number of these emails, has been, you know, along this wall, and a lot of it's really from not understanding. So, you know, if you flip to the next page, my understanding from this grade here is 87 to 95 and a half. 87 to 95 and a half, so 7.5 feet with a frosted glass wall that adds another 3.5 feet, which is basically a solid structure. So we're looking at something in the neighborhood of an 11 to 12 foot structure, which is 6 feet from our property. So it's sort of like building more like a 12-foot wall within a few feet of our structure. If you flip to page 2, I've just tried to draw that out. Again, there's no story poles, so I did my best job here. You can see it basically comes in line with these, the lower part of these electrical wires as you move into the corner of our property. And so that's just some perspective. The next page also, again, trying to kind of draw this without having story poles based on the perspectives that we're able to have. So we're very worried about sort of the impact that this will have on the vineyard, on the existing property structure. The vineyard was planted by John and Carol Tarantino 30 years ago. So, you know, we would want to make sure that there aren't major impacts on that vineyard that we've now been growing for a number of years. And the last page, if you flip to, which is also what we're concerned about, and this is a bit of what I think Jennifer was getting at earlier, is this dynamic, which again we don't understand, but we have this supportive concrete retaining wall, and that and then this fence, which has which is supposed to hold the soil from the retaining wall down to the fence, and we're concerned that a wooden fence won't be sufficient at doing that. It moves it up the grade from our property with just a piece of wood, and you're holding a lot of structure there with plants, with foot traffic. We're also worried with a 6-foot corridor how you'll be able to maintain those bushes. So I'll let Erica finish from there.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Erica Heineken. I'm John's wife. I'm at 427. I grew up in Larkspur, so I'm a local kid. Love it here. And, you know, we do support a majority of this project. I think it's going to be a major addition to the neighborhood. It's a significant size increase. It's about over 4,000 square feet if you count all the stuff built into the hillside. So it's a giant house with a lot of usable space that they're creating. And I feel like the one thing that's kind of missed in the design is just incorporating it into the overall feel of the hillside itself. Because they're not really considering how they can still have usable space. Their patio extends way over onto the front of the house, and they have the lawn, and there's various options that I outlined in my email about, you know, stepping down the patio to decrease the height of the wall. That's an option. You know, looking at setting back the wall farther so you can have different type of landscaping there that we haven't seen any details for in particular, that would just kind of, like John described, like right now that that section cut shows 2 feet of soil up against our property with 2x12s. And is that the right solution for some new construction? I don't know. I'm a mechanical engineer. I work for the city of San Francisco, and I have been a designer, so I've been designing plans and construction management. I'm currently a project manager, and so I see this stuff a lot, and not particular in housing, residential construction, but you know, I'm familiar with this, and I'm weary of that 6 feet there, and you know, it's portrayed as a 5-foot wall, but if you look at all the grading lines and you look at the sloping of our hillside as it goes down, it's a lot bigger than what's shown if you just look at the property itself. So I hope that the Planning Commission kind of considers my thoughts and our concerns, and if they want to see further details or other review options of this patio. I think it could still, if it were cut back or set back or terraced or dropped, I think it could still be a really comfortable house, usable space, and that might be an option. I don't know how these things usually work, so thanks.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Please step up.
Hi, I'm unprepared. This is just off the top of my head. I'm Jill McCrae. I'm 318 Corte Madera, and I don't own the property. I lease it. I've been there half a decade, and I'm staying long term. But I'm the closest, so I'm right opposite the gray stone wall. And just my first comment, it just looks really, really large from where I am, obviously, because it's going much bigger. And same with the owners of 322. We're sort of right across from it. But we both walk our dogs on Corte Madera Avenue every day. So I've done that every day for the last 5 years. And it's about 2 feet, maybe 2.5 feet wide. So if the street does get widened, and there are children that walk on it all through the school year, just for that to be taken into consideration, I don't see how you could stop traffic at all on Corte Madera Avenue for any of that planting. I'm not sure if you'd need to. Usually takes me about 3 to 4 minutes to back out of my carport between now Waze routes everybody on Corte Madera Avenue, and then of course all the cyclists. So they only stop it when there's fire truck, like for the kitchen fire, or when PG&E does the cutbacks. But otherwise you really couldn't bring trucks onto that block for anything. So just to keep in mind the overall size, and if the street does get 2 feet wider, will that be closer to all of us on Corte Madera Avenue? That's it.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Please step up.
Good evening, Harrison Lazarus from 301 Corte Madera Avenue. I, like my wife, Christy Smith, support this project. I view this as the property is now an unfinished project, unfinished development, and what they're doing here is really bringing it together as a cohesive property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, is that everyone that wants to step up? I don't see any other lurches out there. There's a young lady that would like to speak? She's shaking her head. Okay, so that's it. We will keep the public session open if the commissioners have any questions for anyone on staff or the applicant. No. Over here?
I just have a quick question.
Okay.
So, in a downslope condition, when you have a retaining wall of any material, if it fails and ultimately falls on the neighbor's property, is it the responsibility of the owner to fix that at that time? And is it enforceable by the city?
My guess is it's a civil matter between the two properties.
Right, but
ultimately, they're responsible for the upkeep and ongoing maintenance of the retaining wall, right? If in the future it has some sort of deficiency.
you're talking about the wall that's in the public right away?
So I heard in public comment that she's concerned about the 2x12 wood retaining part of the fence, and so
Right.
Basically, if that and the main concern is if it fails, and it's not going to fail on a building, it's going to fail into their vineyard, right? But
Right.
even so, if it encroaches on their property, I would imagine in those kind of conditions that ultimately someone's responsible for the repair. And if the retaining wall is on the property side of, is it a shared fence? Is it a shared retaining wall, or is one owner own it and therefore it's their responsibility for the ongoing maintenance of it? I think that would help me understand what the real issue is in the long term as far as the impact on the neighbor.
Yeah, and I cannot, intelligently speak of the legal ramifications of, a property failing and impacting an adjacent property. And if that, the insurance companies are gonna get involved and the lawyers are gonna get involved and determine, why did this fail? Did this get a building permit? Did it, all those kinds of things. And that's about as far
I'll
as I
take
can
a
speak
stab
of it.
at it,
ahead.
in that if it falls into the permit, right? So it goes into the building department and it becomes a permitted piece. So building is gonna look at it and say, it's a functional structure. It does what it's supposed to do. It's designed for that elevation and it's acceptable, right? So the town says it's okay to install. It's not like it's a renegade wall out there. The town actually has to say it complies with loading and drainage and all of that. But that doesn't make the town liable. But it's on Mr. McCadden's property, so he's liable for that, or any problems that occur. A 100-year flood comes along and washes it over, he's got to pay to clean it up off the neighbor's property. So that's where it falls. It's not a joint responsibility unless the fence is on the property line. If the improvement is on Mr. McCadden's property, it's his problem.
Right.
Unless there's a joint agreement about the fence construction that they may enter into with their neighbor. So, in that case, if I were the vineyard owner, I would say, well, you're putting that two-board retaining wall there, so that's your problem because it's on your property, but we'll pay for the construction of the fence that is sitting on the property line.
Understood.
And then that falls into a joint responsibility. So,
Okay, and that was my assumption as well. I just was seeking
Right.
if we had even more clarification to help me
having
make
dealt with this a number of times, that's what comes up to it. And the architect will have to make a choice of whether or not to include it in the plans or not. When I look at the elevations, as I said, that they've drawn here, the slope is a 1 to 2 foot slope across 6 foot. And then it's a 6-foot wall at the highest point that they have, then plus the railing. The landscaping that they're proposing for there will grow much taller than the rail. The wall will be invisible within a very short period of time. So, and I've planted podocarpus that are 16 foot tall in 3 years. So if they did that, there wouldn't be anything there to see. And so they have many vegetation choices, but in any case, I think that the applicant can take into advisement however they want to negotiate with the owner about the planting or the neighbor, what might go there and how willing the applicant is to accommodate the neighbor and planting.
Mentally, from a
and,
planning standpoint, I'm
So
comfortable with
I
it.
think that what they have in the plan now addresses some issues, but they may change it before they run it in. If it's a significant change, then they gotta bring it back before us. So,
Understood. Okay,
with that
thank you.
said. I saw you raise your hand, sir, and I haven't closed the public hearing. Did you want to make a comment about something?
The only comment
You have to step up to the microphone.
Thanks. The only comment was the retaining wall is on the property line. That wooden, the wooden structure that we're referring
Yeah,
to that's gonna
right.
hold
Right.
2 feet of soil is on, and plants
Right.
and for traffic is on the property line.
Exactly, I understand, yeah. It's on the property line, or it can't be, if the fence is on the property line, the way it's drawn, then the retaining portion of that wood would end up on Mr. McCadden's property. Because just the width of the fence, and you put the boards over there, it's gonna be on his side. So, with that said, I will close the public hearing and bring it back up to the dais here. Charles, your thoughts before we start to consider anything? Just your thoughts, you know?
I think I think it takes in really great the historical character of the existing building overall, what I think a lot of the properties try to achieve up on the hills. I think it will really improve the neighborhood, and I hope that my questions were only in trying to understand how it could even be better, because I think it's just been a great kind of anchor in that whole area. I see other properties also improving in that area as well, and so from a planning standpoint and a design standpoint, I can definitely make the findings and happily approve it. So.
Okay. That's good to hear. Jennifer?
I think it's a very thoughtful design. I think you guys did a really great job on the project as a whole. I hear your concern as the neighbor, and I think, you know, from our perspective, or what I see is that at its max, which is really the side facing Corte Madera Ave, it's that retaining wall is going to be 6 feet, which is, you know, well within what neighbors put up, a solid 6-foot wall on the property line. So I do think that it's not going to have a significant impact on your vineyard. I'm hopeful that that's going to be the case. Obviously, you guys all have to live together for the foreseeable future. So I'm anticipating that the applicant will work with you guys, you know, if there were an issue, and taking your concerns into account here. But I do think that they're trying to be thoughtful in moving it 6 feet away from the property line, and in having it, you know, try to blend and make that space more usable, because there is a significant grade change from the top to the bottom, as you guys, you know, enjoy with sort of the terracing of your yard as well, and understand why they want to make it a more usable patio space. So I am supportive of this project as it is.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Dr. Bundy?
Overall, very, very nice project that's going to fit in. I'm still concerned about the acacia trees along Corte Madera Avenue and sort of the long-term plan for the vegetation that you're going to put in, because I think one of the reasons that this has so little impact on most of the homes along Corte Madera Avenue is really protected by those acacia trees. And it'd be nice if it was sort of protected by something other than acacia trees for the long haul. I think the issue with the fence and the 2x12 boards, if that failed at some point, it would really be a question of just replacing the fence. And because it's a welded wire fence, that's not really a very expensive proposition and could be easily taken care of. I think Dan is within the code from the standpoint of putting the 6-foot retaining, or 5 or 6 foot retaining wall within 6 foot of the property. If you work together and Dan decided to move it back a couple of feet so that there would be a little bigger area for planting through there or access, that maybe that would work out for both of you, be a little less cost from the standpoint of the overall patio, but that would be entirely up to Dan if he chose to do something like that. But otherwise, those are my comments, and I could approve the project.
Thank you, Bob. Phyllis?
Okay, I can approve the project. I find it interesting, usually the problems that neighbors have is with the buildings themselves. This time, there's no question about the building. It's the patio and the retaining wall. So that's rather refreshing. I think a lot of thought went into designing those buildings, the extensions, the remodel, to fit in with what is there. And it will certainly add to the neighborhood. As far as the retaining walls go, it appears that most of it is going to be underground, below the level, and it shouldn't be a problem. If there's a problem, it's on Dan's property, and he's going to have to help you solve it. So, as they say, I can make the findings.
All right, thank you, Phyllis. I think that you guys are rescuing a house that needs rescuing. It's a good design, and it creates, albeit the maximum allowable square footage. I find that the site sort of swallows it up a little bit, you know. We might look at a house like this on a smaller size lot and say, geez, 40, you know, getting to the maximum is a little much. And look at bringing it back down a little bit. But I think the efforts to provide really what might become a real heritage house for the town is here, and I think you've created that design for it, and rescuing something and turning it into a well-designed small estate up there. So on principle, you know, yes, I like the project. I like what you've created, and I think it deserves to be done, and that Mr. McCadden is a very responsible guy, and he'll do the right thing, I'm sure, by his neighbors. So he's a guy with integrity, so I think he'll do the right thing there. I think we always have this problem, and I want to just comment on the photos that are before us, right? So we get these photos, and they're not a part of the official record, so to speak. They are now, if Phil enters them into the record. But when we get them, the public hasn't had an opportunity, nor have we had a real opportunity to address them. And the town has agonized over how photographs were taken, where they're taken from, what are they, and we have struggled with those images as they're presented by commenters or neighbors and so forth. So this photos demonstrates a couple of things, and that uphill from the photograph where you're standing in the photograph, there's vegetation there now that is, I would say it's 6 foot tall with some trees behind it that are probably about 8 to 10 foot tall. And that's going to approximate what the vegetation is along that property line. So that's kind of what it'll be like all the way down the hill, I think, according to the plans. And so, and then you've got a photograph here where you drew out the retaining wall, appears to be right along the property line. And it is not there, so that's why it's always hard to say, you know, that represents what it is. Then there's another one that you're occupying on an obviously warm day recently. So, and the question is, how tall is King Kong, right? So, you know, we don't, and how tall is the wall? So it's really hard, even though you've graphically done this, and I might do exactly the same thing if I were making a comment. I think the impact will be less. I, dear God, hope they would be than this. But I would ask staff that when other applications like this come before it, that they request a story pole height for the retaining walls on the site, because they're significant enough, and they're a building structure, that they get marked out on the site for a top of wall, and that might have helped dispel some issues, and I just think that would have been the right thing to have done. And they might choose to do that for you and mark out and say, here's where it is, and above that is glass. So, and we're going to put these big plants in front of it. You won't see us and so forth. If they chose to step back the wall, they could create a planter on top and a Babylon garden, so to speak, facing your vineyard, and you could have a joint garden, so to speak, between the two properties. But I would say, at this point, I would entertain a motion from any one of the commissioners to put forth the resolution.
I can make the motion. If I can find it. Oh, it's back here. Sorry. All right. In the matter of design review application for modifications to the existing home, including an additional 144 square feet to the basement level, 815 square feet of additional living area to the second level or main level, and 668 square feet to be added to the third or upper level assessor parcel number 025-093-07 at 309 Corte Madera Avenue. I move to approve resolution number 18-008, file number PL-2018-0035 DRC.
Second.
Okay. Take a vote. Dr. Phil?
Commissioner Metcalf,
Aye.
Commissioner Bundy,
Aye.
Commissioner Chase, Commissioner Friedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, do you want to read some appeal rights here? on this?
Yes, the following action by the planning commission at a public hearing or meeting. Any decision by the commission may be appealed to the town council within 10 calendar days. Appeal forms are available at the planning department at town hall, and the filing fee is $300.
Good luck. It's cool. They're not available.
Yeah.
Right.
Owner
So
builder.
we'll take a few-minute break while the room evacuates, and it's good to see you guys, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we're back alone. We're by ourselves.
Oh, dear.
I know.
Okay.
Right,
Yes.
so, and
And you.
I hope we have at least a few more people than voted, actually watching, but maybe not. So here we have notes. No, I have to go into, sorry, we have to leave that. We have to report. So I will report that at the last town council meeting, the Amy's project was thoroughly welcomed and reviewed, and I don't think there was a naysayer in the bunch. So the thing went over very easily, very quickly, and it's good to see that it's getting a good reception. Everybody has an opinion about how it should be done, but I think the design in itself is good. There are all kinds of comments about what might go there with more bicycle or more sidewalk or more this or more that, but it's a well-considered design, and I think staff did a great job on that presentation.
Excuse me, Peter,
Yeah?
it's been approved. So why are they worrying now about more this, more that?
There's one
this?
portion
There was
of
a
it, I believe, that still
modification.
has to come back for a public reading. Is that not correct, Phil?
The second reading of the zoning ordinance amendment has to come back to the council, so it's
So
mainly-
people can still,
So I read in,
Hang on a sec, yeah.
So that's the extent of what's coming back a week from today, I believe.
Yeah, right.
so I read in the Marin Independent Journal that there was some modification to some of the sentence structure related, I think, to the berming or something, but it didn't get into the details. So do you remember what the request was and what they basically approved in the end in relationship to that?
I don't think there was anything about berming or anything. I think that staff will take into consideration and keep an eye on the design that they have with respect to traffic flows, and the applicant acknowledges that they may modify traffic flow or parking out there if there becomes a problem.
That's, okay.
And the backup, the parking or the drive-through lane is not visible from the highway. There's nothing about the parking that's visible from the highway. From Paradise Drive, you're going to see the parking lot, and then you'll see the seating area. You will not see any of the cars picking up their food, and there's a queuing area for people to pick up big orders off to the side. There's actually employee parking and employee bicycle parking. And, I got quoted mistakenly by to IJ and a couple of aspects of it, and I forwarded that to staff and the council, that I did not say it was the best application we had seen. I said it was the best application with all of these elements in it, which were sustainability, solar, all of these things that comprise the project. And the second thing I did say that they had wrong was that the drive-through zoning change was not approved, and people would have to apply for that in other areas. What I said to the IJ was that the criteria for drive-through were significant enough that a drive-through would undergo a serious and difficult review anywhere else in the town as a result of that. And I think that the council agreed with us that this was a unique location and that a drive-through was not problematic in this one location. And Councilman Andrews wanted to bring up specific areas of the town that he thought should not have drive-through, but as it turns out, any of those streets were not eligible for the zoning that would apply to. So that was a moot point. And I think that the writing of the ordinance was well done, such that it would be difficult to make all of the findings in some locations for a drive-through elsewhere in town. Phyllis?
Basically, this is Charles. The IJ has cut back so much from reporters and stuff, you know, so we don't see Adrian here. He may watch it tomorrow, you know, on TV, or he may be trying to watch a couple of ones. But one of the things that I noticed is sometimes, and in this case, I think what you brought up, is he is looking at the original that came before us, and then reporting about the berms and the change.
Maybe it wasn't even burnt. I just remember that there was basically, I thought that there, because maybe it was with the zoning, or I thought that there was, at least from reading the article, because I didn't watch the video, I thought that there was a request to change some language within the overall approval, just one sentence is.
I don't think.
So then either I've misinterpreted or it, you know, in the reading and understanding what they were getting at. And that's why I think it's great that we're clarifying with people that were actually there and putting into the record what our take was and what ultimately happened and transpired. So
My understanding from the council members was that they pretty much followed exactly what we did, and they thanked us for doing all the hard work for them.
okay, great, thank you.
I had another design from our disaster project.
Certainly, let's keep it. Yeah, what's your comment about the design?
Well, my comment is that we've now started going a lot more to the Bon Air, you know, to the Gott's restaurant there. And they've done a really nice job of incorporating like these little play areas for kids. And so you go there and you can eat and your kids play. And I'm like, ugh, Amy should put like a little play area on the patio.
She mentioned that they're exploring that.
Who did? Rachel?
Right, the owner. Yeah,
Okay.
Offline.
I'm gonna email Rachel and tell her my
Do.
idea. Because like we go there and we hang out for hours now because like our kids are entertained, but your kids will only sit for 3.5 minutes to eat. So
Yes.
if they want it to be a family destination, they need a play area. That's my 2 cents. It doesn't have to be large, but they had a pretty large patio, if I recall. They can dedicate a little corner of it to play.
Well, it's a game changer for how food is sold and how environments are created
It's
for
gonna be
restaurants. So it's really good.
Well, they call themselves a family restaurant,
Yeah.
so that fits right in.
So I think that the only other stuff that was covered in the council meeting was the budget, which was a barn burner, and the streets and street improvement plan, and more discussion about how they need to divert money to all the flood control projects, because that's going to suck money over the years. But it's also clear to me that Peter Brown has really taken a hold of the position, and he's doing a really great job in figuring out where all this is going.
Yeah, he's a go-getter.
It's I'm trying to remember if it was the meeting before that he had all the public works staff stand up, and nobody's ever done that for those guys to get recognition. It was really great.
That's great.
You know, so he
They
understands
should.
it. So that's all I have to say. Does anybody else have anything to report?
Yes.
Yes, Bob.
Both Phil and I attended the Transportation Authority of Marin's Moving Marin Forward recently, and one of the comments that came out was that futurists or people looking 20, 25 years out, they overpromise but underimagine the future, and they gave some examples of that. And it appears that the direction of the futurists are that autonomous vehicles are the future, and they're expecting it to be a shared economy of these autonomous vehicles, and that there'll be less private ownership but more shared, so that it'll be a Lyft and Uber type experience without a driver. And
Without accidents?
and with fewer accidents than we experience now. The other thing, Steve McKenzie had some good points about we really need to look at transportation as reconsidering land use from the standpoint, if this does transpire, that perhaps parking lots and parking structures will have to be built with the thought that they could be reconfigured as apartment complexes or some other use, and that just the parking lots may well, be reconsidered too, that we're not going to need the size of parking lots that we have now if it's a shared vehicle use. One of the comments was that they expect there was a expectation that an autonomous vehicle shared would take 9 vehicles off the road, and that when you consider what you're having to spend to maintain a car now, that the autonomous vehicle may create tremendous savings for the population to use for other purpose. Any other thoughts that you took away from it, Phil?
No, I would just agree with those. The autonomous vehicles are coming and can radically change the design of cities and our transportation system, and the elimination of tons of parking lots. And also, not this year, but the previous year, someone mentioned just the medical ramifications. You can see how many people are killed and injured in automobile accidents. And nobody's pretending that there won't be automobile accidents with autonomous vehicles, but majority of automobile accidents are caused by human error. And so you remove humans from the equation, and most people think we'll have fewer accidents, and tremendous impact on the medical industry.
And insurance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a good way, except maybe fewer doctors needed.
Did they get into anticipated kind of planning and zoning changes, or is that so far out that they were just kind of talking high level? I mean, is it that we're going to have drop-off curbs everywhere and other types of kind of ways to support it on an infrastructural city side, right? Is it like at some point does the infrastructure start talking back to them, streets,
We're
street
already
lights, all that kind of stuff? Like,
designing apartment buildings now to have Uber waiting areas and drive lane where they can drop off and pick up right in front of the building.
Yeah.
Because it's so popular. There's signs, Uber park here.
Yeah.
So I think that trend just continues. I mean, I think, and we've talked about this before too, how do you plan a parking structure that can then be converted to residential? It's really, really challenging, but someone's gonna do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
And figure it out.
It's
the
the future, and it's here soon.
Yeah, the goal was to try to do a parking structure that didn't have ramps, and I don't know if that would just be elevators or, what that would be, but so that it would be much easier to convert to another use.
You look at the problems Mitt Romney had when he said he was putting an elevator in his own garage.
Just think of all the great car
Ahead of-
chase
ahead of
scenes
its
that couldn't
time.
take place down the ramps of garages.
What could be placed there?
You know, the great car chase scenes in parking garages.
Yes, oh, yeah.
You know, that
Yeah.
would be out of the thing. So
Yeah.
take an elevator, get your car down. So Phil, do you have anything to report from the planning department?
Yes, lots of construction going on. So in terms of permits issued or soon to be issued within the month or the week, the gravel lot, Restoration Hardware Gallery, Marin Country Day School, Marin Montessori School, 200 Nellen, and so it's 5 projects right there that are all going to be
Wow.
working this summer. The 2 projects on Chapman are underway, probably, one's 2/3 done, one's a half done. Doug just reported that 122 and 124 Grove are moving forward. So a lot of projects that you folks approved are now being built or soon to be built.
Is Seminole moving forward?
Seminole.
19 Seminole, the one
Second
that,
story.
500 square foot addition.
The
I
second
don't
story.
think they've received a building permit yet. I'm not exactly sure though.
I do have to congratulate us. I think we did a good job on approval of the project. I don't remember the address, but the Corte Madera project, Corte Madera Ave project that they're just finishing
Right across the street
across
from
the
this
street
one.
from this one, where we had them lower the roof height. I think
Uh-huh.
it looks awesome. And it looks appropriately sized for the street.
well, you'd be singular in that.
You didn't like it?
I think that a lot of people feel it's still too high.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't win them all.
Good, always good to get feedback. Right.
Well, see, that's the difference between an ordinance and design review, because the ordinance will have the numbers of how tall, how wide, et cetera, and design review is the aesthetics.
Did you like the aesthetic of it?
I've learned to live with certain things and not get real upset about them anymore.
Yeah.
Well, for a street frontage building, it looks good, you know. I
Right.
just think it's the
I
biggest
mean,
thing.
people are
on the-
whizzing by,
Right.
yeah. But it's, yeah, anyway.
So, with that said, on the houses on Chapman, the one that was the LA owner house, is that the one that's further along than the individual?
Yeah, so 502 is, right, it's kind of down the hill, Craig McLean. Yeah, I don't know, I think they're both pretty close in terms of progress. They're both underway.
What about 6 Windward,
6 Windward,
8 Windward,
Westward?
Westward? Thank you.
Yeah, Doug was mentioning that. I think they're close to submitting for their building permit as well.
Yeah, that's the tear down.
No, no, that was the big addition that Sherwood was concerned about losing his
Come back
view.
through.
They
Yeah,
worked to
But
preserve it.
I thought those would end up being torn down and then rebuilt.
And I would just want to ask if, if you folks have summer vacations or, times you're going to be away during the planning commission, in the summer months.
It's gonna be
Let
my
us know.
next meeting, the next meeting,
That's right. Tomorrow, next meeting is Jennifer's last one.
yes.
And you won't be here?
No, I will be here.
Oh,
But I'm going away that first meeting in July. I told Adam that,
Okay,
so I will not be here for that meeting.
okay.
Phyllis
Anybody
is
else
in
know, no particular meetings? You just email us.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to report.
All right. With that said, my only question about the proposed agenda is what kind of food does Flores serve?
Mexican.
Mexican
This is
food.
really good
Mexican.
news.
And margaritas, they're really big
It's
on there.
supposed to be great.
Okay, well, that's all we can ask about it. So with that
I've had
said,
enough of pizza restaurants and Mexican restaurants.
does anybody have any changes to the minutes before we ask for,
Nope.
Or can I just jump in?
Yeah.
Any proposed items and order are subject to change? At number 7, what is that, 7A4? Is that for you folks to give us possible future items? Is that what that is?
item 4, you're saying, oh, 7.4, yeah, right.
Seven
Does
A
That's
anybody-
for us to
Yeah.
bring up.
Okay, so no one has anything to bring up under 7A4?
Well, there is something, but I don't know if the timing's right, so.
Okay.
I think
no,
something that would be interesting, and it doesn't have to be at the next meeting, but this is just a brainstorm because Charles and I were just talking about it. So I met a couple weeks ago with Tom McHugh, who you guys all remember from the Planning Commission, and he told me in detail sort of the process that they went through. Remember, they had come before us to get their second story approved.
right.
Well, after they sort of went through the whole process and, you know, the FEMA regulation around the 50% of your existing improvements, like, I don't know if it would make sense to maybe invite the new public works director or someone, but essentially what he said was that it was cost prohibitive to add a second story, just from the perspective, like, you just can't do it at this point with construction costs being what they are if you're in the floodplain, which incorporates a lot of houses in Corte Madera. And I'm just wondering if that would be something for us to sort of all get educated on, because it's essentially then, it functions as a moratorium on second stories for Madera Gardens, which I think is just something for us to sort of talk through and understand, like, or can he help quantify what the cost is if you are going to raise it? You know, what is the process? Like, I think it would be helpful to the public because this is going to continue to come up over and over again, sort of like,
And get tougher and tougher.
and get harder and harder. So, like, what is the process you have to go through? Like, is that true? Because apparently part of it is also, and Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the whole 5-year rule around the cost of the improvements is purely like Corte Madera's interpretation of the FEMA component of it, such that like that doesn't have to exist in that way. So meaning that like, you could shorten that time frame such that like maybe someone wants to do a first story and a second story addition, but it's only a 1-year gap versus a 5-year gap. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of different elements to it. And I think it would be helpful because otherwise, then it would also, this is also for the planning department's benefit, like as you're having conversations with people from anyone who lives within the floodplain, which again covers the majority of Madera Gardens, like, what are their options and how do they
Have
quantify
an
it?
info sheet.
Yeah, an info sheet so that when people are even looking to buy a house here and they're thinking, oh, I can easily add a second story, well, like, maybe or maybe not. So I would be very interested if it looks like a very light agenda for next time, and if that's something that that he could come and speak to us a bit about, or like speak a bit more in depth about the interpretation of the FEMA rules and costs.
I've talked about it with Bob a little bit because I
Yeah.
think Bob talks a lot about flood control, and
Yeah.
I think in
Yeah.
commercial properties I've seen where basically they're not raising it up on a giant plinth, but somehow they just kind of close off the doors in these flood ability, and like, you know, I've never understood why that wouldn't be applicable to residential
Yeah.
either. So just understanding
like
how
dry
fundamental,
proofing or
yeah,
whatever.
dry proofing, why that wouldn't apply, and
Or like, how did
I
all
just don't
these
understand
houses
those because
in-
it's such a unique condition to kind
Yeah.
of flood-prone areas in this town.
I would like Bob to sort of address it because he does have some experience.
And
already.
also, how did all the houses in Mariners Cove get raised? Like, a lot of those houses have been raised, and they clearly did not spend like $300,000 raising those houses, because that was probably like the cost of the house to begin with. So I'm just curious, like, did it used to be a lot less expensive to raise the houses? Or is it just that, I don't know, I'd be curious, because you're an expert on this stuff.
Well, the houses in Mariner Cove have been raised really over the years, and probably 20 years ago when houses first started being raised, and part of the reason was they settled, you know, so they had
sinking.
settled unevenly, and people really needed to level the house, but it doesn't cost that much more to raise the house than it does just to level it. And so maybe it was $25,000 20 years ago when the houses are worth $400,000, and it may be, you know, maybe it's 50,000, and now the houses are going for over $1 million. So proportionally, it's actually gone down, as the cost
So
of
you think
actually.
the cost to raise a house now is only $50,000?
When you actually look at the cost just to raise it and do that, now, when people do that, they're remodeling their house, they're doing everything else, but the actual cost to do the raising, leveling it with pony walls probably is in that range for a perimeter foundation house. 50, yeah.
I would have
And
thought it was like $100,000 plus.
I don't think so. I mean, there was one neighbor that
Peter
3 or 4
shaking his
years
head.
ago leveled their house, didn't
Peter
really
knows,
raise
he's the
it,
contractor.
and it, it was $19,000, $20,000.
I mean, like, basically, the Madera Gardens example that I gave, which, as you guys recall, doesn't even have like a second story bathroom or any plumbing upstairs. The quotes they were getting were like $500,000 to $600,000, which
That was-
clearly exceeds.
That was
even,
for
like-
the whole project?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question to Phil would be, what did Mr. McHugh, Tom have to go through that became prohibitive, or what was the problem beyond our approving a second story?
It was the cost of the improvements. So,
Yeah,
He
so I
isn't
can-
even putting
I can
a
talk to
if
it
bathroom
a
the value
upstairs.
of my current improvements, because this is true, is $500,000, let's say. You go through, you get an appraisal, that maybe you get it a little bit higher, because it's gonna be higher through an appraisal than it is through your taxes typically.
So
And
I
then,
can.
so you
yeah.
can only spend then $250,000 on any improvement in your house without raising it out of the floodplain. So now, you can't even do, I mean, again, if we're trying to encourage people to, most people in Madera Gardens, I think, if you're gonna add a second story, you're gonna likely do something to the first floor as well, right? You're gonna somehow have to incorporate, you're not gonna give up one of your.
You're gonna make stairs
You're not
at
gonna,
a
yeah,
minimum,
right,
yeah.
the house is only 1,400 square feet to begin with, so like,
Right.
you're probably gonna expand it. So basically what he said was that he was getting quotes that were $500,000 to do the scope that they wanted, and so therefore they just kiboshed the whole project because it became cost prohibitive. It just didn't make sense. And so all I'm saying is, like, I'll be curious to hear, like, if the Seminole project moves forward and like how they're gonna do that, because they actually were not making a lot of changes to their
So I can-
first floor, but
I
like,
can-
how, like, what's the cost of that addition, and are they actually gonna find someone who can do it for that? But essentially what I'm saying is that if it's actually, the function is that you can no longer add a second story to a house in Madera Gardens without raising the house, then like it might be helpful for people to understand like what's the cost to do
And
that.
if I remember correctly, he couldn't build back.
And then that also impacts like your roof heights and all that, so
Sure.
all of
So I
that
can-
then.
I can speak generally in terms of, because I did a lot of floodplain management in Petaluma before I came here.
Okay.
And so the general rules, the general goal of FEMA is to not have people die and not have property damage and not pay out money.
Right.
And so FEMA's role is to, keep people safe, generally speaking. And so they say, if you live in the floodplain and you have an existing home, and the project to improve your home was going to cost more than 50% of the value of the building. So not the land.
Right.
In Marin
Right.
and
The
California,
building.
the land is often
Right.
worth
It's just
more
the
than the building.
improvements. Right.
So let's say you've got a building and it's worth, the building is worth $200,000. And you're going to do a remodel and it's going to cost you $102,000. And so FEMA is going to say, all right, you're significantly increasing the value of that structure. If it floods, that means we got to pay out, a significant more amount of money. So we want you to elevate that structure. And so FEMA says you need to put that building a foot, in some municipalities is 2 feet above the 100-year base flood elevation. So when the water comes for that 100-year flood, which happens, 1% chance every year that it will happen, then you're going to be a foot above the land. So does that automatically make adding a second story cost prohibitive? It's very, very project specific. It's difficult to say. And, Bob's comment, to take an existing building and all I'm doing is I'm taking this box, I'm raising it up 3 feet. I'm just putting, 3 feet of concrete around the outside. Pretty simple project. But most people, if they're doing that, they're also ripping out the kitchen and they're doing all kinds of other stuff, because it makes sense. If you're gonna if you're buying a house, if you're gonna improve it, well, I don't want this thing to flood, so I'm gonna improve it and I'm gonna elevate it. So I can't speak to McHugh's specific situation, but we can certainly look into
Well,
it.
and, over there in the gardens there, a few years ago, there was a problem before the map got redrawn, right? People couldn't get flood insurance, or they couldn't get insurance for their home because it wasn't falling into category, right? So there was Michael Lappert was working on that issue that,
You can always get insurance, just write them a check. Anybody will give you insurance. If you're in the floodplain and you have a federally financed loan, then you must get insurance.
Right.
And so that's the difference. You can
But even
you
if
can buy
you
flood
have-
insurance
But
But
Peter
even if you have
yourself.
flood insurance through like Lloyd's of London or whatever, you still have to abide by these FEMA rules, correct?
If you're in the
Yeah.
floodplain. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I guess my point just being that I think this is something that a lot of people would like to be educated on.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think
both
that's
in
good.
Mariners Cove and in Madera Gardens, which covers a very large portion of residents in Corte Madera, and so
Yeah,
I'm,
I will-
and I'm
I will-
personally very interested in it.
Yeah,
'Cause I live in Madera
I'll mention it
Gardens.
to Adam and to Peter and see what we can pull together. I don't know if we can pull it together in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, you know what we may look at? There are more subjects than that, which I think is very important. Maybe look at when we have light agendas, have I hate the word, study session at the end. Do it at the end of the meeting, because a lot of times people aren't interested in stuff we would
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
learn. So they can leave.
Yeah,
And go over, have a certain topic and get educated on it.
yeah.
okay, well, we've exhausted that.
Right.
And does
I
anybody
move
have any
approval of
commentary
the
on
minutes.
Okay,
Nope. Move to approve the
commentary?
minutes.
All right.
Move to approve.
Second voice vote, all aye.
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 Okay, meeting adjourned.